I'm so glad you all are here for what is our last fall 2025 event. Margot and Daniel, I know friends here know this already, but I'll tell you again that every semester we take your feedback on topics that you want to talk about. This semester we themed on broadly construed agricultural and environmental ethics topics, but I'll run another series in the spring, and I really am looking for feedback. So if there's topics that you both want to hear us talk about or you want to talk about, and there's a podcast you can share with me that's related to them, let me know, and that's what we'll do. This can be your series as much as ours. So, but today we are talking about environmental implications of data centers, broadly construed. This is a topic that a lot of us are talking about now, not just in the ethics education space, but also in the research space across engineering and philosophy. To tell you where I'm situated, I'm a research fellow with Ethics Center at the University of Mississippi, the Center for Practical Ethics. These two are fellows with me working on that project, and we're looking at ethics of data centers in Mississippi specifically. And then I'm teaching a graduate level data ethics, digital ethics course on AI this semester, and a big theme of that course is, of course, environmental impact. So I know enough to be dangerous, but not on the technical side. So I'm so excited for both of you to be here. And we can start, as always, anywhere you want to start, whether it's with the podcast or whether it's themes. You tell me.
I wrote themes.
Cool.
I
Themes are good.
actually downloaded a transcript of the podcast and used it as one of the annotations for our research.
Oh, nice.
It's not like an actual annotation, but
yeah,
it had so much to work with. And I feel like it could end up being some guiding principles for us to streamline conversation.
nice.
So I feel like naturally I'm going to talk about the research that we're doing at UCF a lot for this. So I hope you're cool with that. But it'll be helpful because you guys sound like you have a lot of really valuable insight and could help like elucidate some interesting but confusing points.
Yeah. Margot, you said you specifically have been thinking about this topic. So are there things that like are on your minds on the ethics side specifically?
Yeah, I think one thing I've thought about a lot, I don't know if this is like anywhere related to any of the themes you wrote down, but something I've been thinking about a lot with AI is like the kind of chain of responsibility. And I think that's something I've seen very directly. They kind of talked about it a little bit, like I know like in the podcast, the part that stands out in my memory is like when they were talking about computer scientists versus computer engineers and like who's equipped to be thinking about these issues in like a well-rounded manner. But I went to a conference about 2 months ago that was about machine learning, but it was like very much from the mathematical side, and there were people from like pretty big AI companies there giving talks, and I was like, I was going with the intention I was missing my ethics class, so I needed to do like an ethics write-up. So I was in all of these presentations, I was very much looking for like where the ethics was coming in, and like not a single one of the talks said anything about ethics, because I think they're very focused on like the innovation side, like how do we just get this to do what we want it to do, but they didn't say anything about like how they're considering ethics. And I'm like, those are the people who are developing these technologies for like Meta and Google, and they're the people developing these technologies, but that like they didn't mention a single thing about like energy usage or like workforce concerns or like misuse cases and how they're like safeguarding against that. So kind of a long-winded way to say like how companies and how the engineers are like incorporating ethics, making sure that like end users are using it correctly. I don't know, kind of like who's responsible for the outcomes of AI and like machine learning advancement.
That kind of reminds me of something I was listening to the other day, where it was about like AI regulations, and it was some politicians talking about like they felt like that the states really missed the opportunity to regulate social media more when that was new. So they want to not be behind with AI. And then someone, I don't know what AI company it was from, but they were talking about that. Oh, well, if you start like putting disclaimers that you're using an AI, then customers might be pushed away and not want to use the product as much. Therefore, AI regulation is bad because it might scare off customers.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like a go-to business argument.
Yeah.
Like building products to sell.
Margo, I'm interested, what were these talks? Were they like from a specific AI developer and like what was the purpose of them?
Yeah, so it was a conference that was trying to it was like a 4-day thing with a lot of talks. And it was kind of trying to bring together like these very like theoretical like mathematicians, and like how can like that work be applied. It was specifically looking at like topology and algebra and geometry and stuff, which is kind of like what my research is in. And then like how can that be used to improve machine learning? So there were kind of talks from the very like math theoretical side, and then there's kind of an even amount of talks um from more like end application. So there was someone that, or there were a couple people who talked about Google DeepMind, um, someone um, who talked about Meta's AI research. There were a couple of like mathematical reasoning, like kind of more mathematical research specific AIs, that were not like these large language models. Um, so it was kind of like covering a kind of broad and like somewhat disconnected um, group of topics with the hopes of like bringing them together, and like seeing how math like these like theoretical math concepts could be used to improve AI.
Okay, I see why you were saying that they didn't have, it's like you're saying that it was broad mathematically, but it was actually not broad enough in terms of like how AI actually impacts the world in different disciplines. So
Yeah, and
it was missing.
yeah, I mean, it's very noticeable, and particularly, I can see how maybe that's not coming up from the mathier talks, um, understandably, but
Right.
particularly from like these big companies, like specifically the Google DeepMind people, they were talking about um, their models were able to solve like the math Olympiad, so they were like talking about kind of like the talking about like how they achieved that, and talking about like entering the International Math Olympiad each year. They were like, well, we were able to get our model to do this, and it was by taking this model, but it wasn't the consumer model. They like took their model and then they just like souped it up. They gave it like more compute and like kind of all of the resources that they don't give to consumers, but they just like supercharged it, and then they were like, okay, and once we supercharged it, we were able to like it was able to accomplish this task, but it didn't necessarily have that. They were like, well, we've achieved that now, and we did it by unlocking a bunch of like just giving it more resources, and they're like, and now we're done with that, and we're
No
moving on from that.
consideration.
Yeah, and it's like
Totally.
there's a lot of work. I mean, there's a big discussion about
But
like
I gotta think, Margot, that this is pretty standard, right? Like, it feels like in the engineering and sciences, in computer science now too, most of you all work at the bench side on a really specific niche topic. And so sometimes I think it's hard to pull back and be like, I could imagine a world in which this has ethical, legal, and social implications because it's so specific. Like maybe it's a really particular kind of modeling. And while it could be
mhm.
an application, and that's where it have ethical implications, it's really hard to see those in the little narrow bucket. Do you think that was the problem going on?
I definitely think that's an aspect. Because I was thinking about this a lot in my research, because I'm like very early stages. Like it doesn't even, I do like network modeling. It doesn't even look like machine learning related unless you kind of know like how it connects.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so we were actually asked to think about this for my ethics course of like what, like how do we incorporate like the kind of industry standards for like our domains, how do we incorporate that into our current research? And so I was thinking a lot about that, about that where that kind of ethical responsibility begins.
Yeah,
Because I mean, I'm not doing that crazy of research, but like say I were to like come up with something very theoretical in my research, but then it goes on and like has all these future applications in like, I don't know, technologies that could do very good and very bad things. I think it's very easy from this position to like just abstract it away and just say, well, I'm just doing my master's research, like whatever. And even though
yeah,
I know that this is going to go on and like is setting up a lot of work for the future of the research group that I'm in, it's very it like I haven't really thought about it until I was in this class of like it doesn't feel like my research has any like glaring ethical like it's not a near term technology. So I was like hadn't even thought about it until my professor was like your research has ethics in like it all does. And
yeah,
so
yeah,
I do think in like I don't know, in a very like academic setting, it's easy, especially at like the beginning of like of these more theoretical projects, to just like I don't think a lot of people are thinking about it, but I think that starts to change, and where I'm trying to think is like where that changes between academic research into like end term consumer, like being deployed to consumers technology. Like where does that start? Because I think it's not just at the companies. I think it's where like the research is being done in academia. So I think that's kind of like I guess that's what I've been thinking about, and I don't have like a good answer for
Well, that's the
for
point of
that.
research, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
A couple of things stand out to me. I won't be able to find it right now, but I'll see if I can track it down. There was a really interesting, let's call it a study done a few years ago, where an editor for a proceedings journal in computer science decided she'd do an experiment, and she required all conference presenters to include an ethics component in their proceedings. And she got incredible pushback from this group of computer scientists who were like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm building this algorithm or I'm doing this like design work. What are my ethical implications? And she really had to push them to think about the ethical implications. But when they did, this became a norm for the journal, where like proceedings now have an ethics component that's a requirement. But that initial push was to sort of get computer scientists in this case to see that their work does in fact have ethical implications. But I think for a lot of folks, in whatever domains, we do our work on the day to day, and it's really hard, unless you're an ethicist, to think about the way that has ethical implications. But so it's encouraging, Margot, that like your faculty are like reminding you that even the stuff you're doing right now has ethical implications if you can see them
Mhm.
clearly. And then two philosophical concepts came to mind. One is the bystander effect. I guess that's a psychological concept, but the idea that like if you don't pick up what's going on, those around you aren't going to either. So what was her name? Oh, that's the story of Kitty Genovese. Do you remember this story from psychology classes?
Not the New York one. Is it?
Yeah, it's the New York one. Yeah, yeah. She's the one with the,
If we're talking
sorry.
about the same one.
No, it's a really, it's not a happy case, no, for sure, but it's a really powerful example of how the bystander effect works, or the failures of ethical thinking. Um, and then the other thing is completely tangential but important, is Hannah Arendt and the banality of evil, right? Her idea out of World War II was that if you don't pay attention to ethics around you and you think it's not my job or it's too small, then evil, on her reckoning, evil creeps in this banal way. It's not like there's some evil genius out there like about to hit the button or pull the plug or whatever, but it's these little failures that aggregate over time. So both of those things are hopefully not relevant to the context of like, Marco, your work in quantum computing. On the other hand, I think thinking about the ethics of our work on the day-to-day is super important. Yeah, so those two things stood out to me.
It reminds me of what the podcast talked about, comparing computer scientists to engineers, and that
Yeah.
engineers tend to just be engaged with ethical implications because they're actually producing a physical thing and like they're working on production. So they naturally have to engage with recipients, whereas computer scientists can be, and then there was also,
Yeah,
I cut myself off and I didn't finish the thought, can be more cerebral and not thinking about or not seeing what's happening. And then the hardware versus software, he kind of said like engineers engaged with hardware and software development, but I think he said the computer scientist is mostly software development. This is not my genre, so if I'm wrong about anything, you just let me know. But I thought it was interesting, again, the idea of like a physicality bringing you a stronger sense of ethical duty than when you're solely theoretical. And it's not theoretical. Computer science isn't theoretical, but it's like on a computer. It's
Yeah, like
virtual,
computational.
I guess. Yeah, and non-confrontational. That's a great one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Computational, but that works too.
Oh.
I mean, that good
The
interpretation. That works
computational
too.
was a mishearing, but it actually worked perfectly for what I needed. So
yeah, I think I hadn't thought about that really, but that idea that ethics is most clearly or most viscerally apparent to us in the material.
Yeah.
Whether that's social interactions or the day-to-day like actual physical relations, and less in the computational or the virtual.
and the software development, but software development has just as significant of an opportunity for like environmental mitigation techniques that
Yeah.
hardware does. We think about hardware and like natural resource use and stuff, but the software as well is capable of doing some really great mitigative strategies.
Yeah, so actually there's one, and I want to draw attention to it because I think it's few and far between, but I think there's one really positive, ethically positive aspect to this data infrastructure conversation that's going on now, is that it's showing us that our virtual is connected to the material. And so the choices we make in online spaces, computational spaces, have material consequence. And I think that's one way of like reckoning the ethical weight of our choices online with the world. For better or worse, one of the tech CEOs, I can't remember if it was Zuckerberg or OpenAI, what's his name? Sam Altman. Somebody said you shouldn't say please and thank you in your conversations because it like
Yeah, I think
costs
that's
water.
Altman.
Yeah, Altman. Yeah. So I don't know if that's like, from a Kantian perspective, that's bad, right? We're training ourselves not to be appreciative of interaction, which could translate bad to socially. Yeah. But from a material consequence, he's saying like it takes energy, but his argument's kind of silly because I might say the same thing. Like, Gretchen, you do me a favor, and I'm like, I'm not going to say thank you because it costs me energy. Like,
Yeah.
it's just more efficient. Just be.
It sounds like he's trying to reify the idea in our head that like it's not sentient and it's not.
I think that was his goal.
perceiving.
Yeah.
But it also, like in a subtle way, is like a way to be like, I'm addressing your fear of the Terminator.
Right.
It's a legitimate thing. I'm sure he
Yeah.
hears it all the time.
I'm sure.
And he's like, don't worry, it doesn't care. But then why did you create an AI that is so personable?
Yeah. Yep. Yep. That's right. And I don't know that he did intentionally. That's the result of a large language model, right? Yeah. So this is, for me, this is one of the big questions in this space is like, what's our target of ethics? Because if it's our relationships to virtual chatbots, like, should we be nice to them or not? Should we treat them as moral patients? Should we not? That's one thing. But then on the back of any virtual agent are all these environmental harms to ecosystems, harms to non-human animals who get displaced, harms to local communities. And that's traditionally been our target. And so it feels a bit to me in that old traditional sense, like all this virtual stuff is just a mere distraction from broadly construed issues of climate change. But on the other side of that, there's this really interesting space where we're thinking about how do we ethically relate online through virtual, with one another virtually or with artificial agents virtually.
Those are both very interesting and just complete, but I guess they are.
They're related, but yeah,
but
but they're different.
we could go off on,
I know.
we could spend
Yeah.
the next hour on
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything intriguing, Margot, but she has great insight. I, of course, want to talk about the natural resources because that's what we're doing research on.
Right. Yeah.
But I personally am a big anti-social media advocate, so I could just start ranting. You know, come on.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to do both of those things. And I just want to make sure we stay sort of constrained by the environmental ethics themes.
Yeah.
So some of those.
Now for next spring, we can talk about like online ethics.
Yeah.
for the
Oh, that would be
theme. I
fun.
think
Yeah.
that would
All
be
right.
interesting, 'cause there's so much we could talk about.
Sure.
I was thinking philosophy of science. I was about to start pitching
Um,
ideas, but
so sorry, one tangent for the three of you. It doesn't have to be thematic. It has been in the past, but there's no reason we couldn't do like a session
We
on
could
multiple
do
topics. So.
Theme before spring break and then one after. Spring
Oh,
break.
yeah, there you go. Sure. Yeah. I gotta let Margot jump in here too to see if you've got ideas for sessions, but you can let us know.
I had something I was thinking about. I'm not really sure if like we now let me start over. We were just talking about how like saying please and thank you to like chat GPT takes more energy.
Yeah.
So and I was thinking about like if you search on Google now, Google AI comes up at the top. Maybe there's a way to turn it off, but I do not know enough about computers for that. But
No,
so
wait.
a Google search now using more energy because of the Google AI than just a regular search would. Because at first, I remember I had a conversation with someone who said that he's just going to use Chat GPT to Google stuff, to like Google something. And I was like, well, if you use Google, it takes less energy. But now if Google AI is connected to Google, are we then using more energy for every Google search, even if we don't want or need an AI answer?
I just like piggybacking on that, I literally just I was like had a seminar before this, and before the seminar started, like people were just like we were just like chatting, and people were complaining about like automatic like AIs that are automatically integrated, and
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
remember like what it wasn't Google, but it was something similar that
Copilot. Copilot
automatic.
was such
Yeah,
a pain
it
to
might
turn
have been
off. I hate
It might have been
Copilot.
Copilot.
Yeah. So
But they were complaining about how it was so hard to like you had like it was so hard to find where to turn it off, and it was like
yeah.
killing their computer power because it was like automatically
Yep. It's in everything.
engaging.
Yeah.
And so like that's I mean very like
So,
small example of like a personal device, but they were like, yeah, it was just draining my computer power.
so here's if you don't know already, here's the answer to the question. First of all, use some more energy. But did you know that this is a thing? You can ask if you Google search something, let's just say Google School of Mines, and you just do -AI, it just is a traditional Google search. So you can yep, you can automatically
like type in .com.
they've made it really, really easy. So
But they didn't talk about it.
right,
Exactly.
you kind of have to know that that's how it works, but it's just a simple Boolean search exchange. You can just be like subtract AI from the results and shut it off. Yeah, so I think these are the little things that are important to me on the like micro scale, the things that you and I have control over.
The phenomenological experience.
That's right. Or my environmental impact. I can minimize it with 3 little characters.
That
Oh, go ahead.
I feel like that's interesting. Oh, sorry, I'll be quick. But
Yeah,
like
go ahead,
you have
Marco.
to like actively turn it off rather than actively turning it on, because that's such
Right.
like a passive way that it's I mean 10xing the energy usage of like my grandma who's Googling something isn't ever gonna know that think to like take away AI, even though she's not using AI. Like my grandma's gonna Google
Right.
something and click
Well,
on the first link or whatever, and she's never even gonna look at the AI recap or whatever. But like,
no.
and that's true for like so many people who are using this. But
But one thing to to point to as a coming potential is that I think we all have a sneaking suspicion that AI is doing what Google did when the internet first ramped up and Google first became a browser, and what social media did, and what streaming services did for media. Those services are free to you right now because they're collecting information to make their products better. But very soon, Google will turn this off and only enable it for those paying customers, and it'll be tiered just like everything else is. So
So yucky.
there's an energy cost up front to the training and the development that won't be there long term. So short term, there's a tremendous amount of energy that went into training OpenAI's platforms and every Gemini and everything else. Running those takes a significantly less amount of energy once they're trained. So someday soon we'll hit a peak in the training where we won't need all that extra energy just for training. So short-term costs and then long-term costs. Yeah.
Because they talked about in the podcast too, like that the data collection for these models are still skewed. They're collecting data from, is that a microwave or an alarm?
Microwave down the hall. You're good.
The data that they're collecting is skewed towards the specific demographic of people they're collecting. And then
Right.
applied, like in healthcare ethics, they talk about applied more broadly. So the data is not representative of the application.
Yeah.
Additionally, unequal distribution of like impact. So like
Yes.
the impacts on people
Yeah.
who never got the benefits of AI are experiencing harsher impacts than the people who do. So in this example, I provide my information to AI development, and then they make me pay for it later once it's developed.
Yeah.
But like,
Yeah.
but oh gosh,
This
it's
is
so
this, I mean,
annoying.
you just pointed to the heart, the core of the information economy. That's exactly how it works. And that's how it's worked since the internet rolled out and big data became a thing. Like
Mm.
you provide as much information as they can get from you, and they give you as little back as they can. And that unequal exchange is what makes money. Yeah.
Then they did acknowledge in the podcast as well, and also in the articles I've been reading for our research, to remind you, a good article will remind you that those really big data centers are not just doing AI.
No,
They are
no.
doing things like the Ring camera on
Yes.
your front
Yeah,
door.
this is good. Yeah.
And
yeah.
like the smart things on your camera and like simple things like that.
Yeah.
Which means that this has been a relevant conversation since Instagram. And
Since the Internet of Things was a
yes,
thing. Yeah.
yeah. And so now I hear like since I'm environmental, people like ask me about like buzzword like environmental crises, and a
Yeah.
lot of them is like AI, and they're like just radically against it all of a sudden, like
Yeah.
it's a moral high horse thing without understanding. I'm like,
Yeah. It's
we've
a
been doing this.
Yeah, it's the pinnacle of the information economy is what AI is fundamentally. The statistics the podcaster offered was really interesting, that he said 3% of global energy consumption already goes to data centers for Internet of Things. And then he said, I think if I heard him right, 4 to 6% is the estimate, and that has been tripled. It's now like 12% of global energy will go to AI centers. And that's just in a year and a half since this podcast came out, right? Like that energy cost is at that point was exponential. It's plateaued like everything does, but still 12% of energy going to basically the pinnacle of the Internet of Things.
Yeah.
So at some point we have to make decisions about what's really important and what's not. And for me, that's like the fundamental environmental ethics question is if we think AI and the Internet of Things is helping us flourish, if that's your ethics target, right? Or if it is it helping the planet be sustainable, if that's your ethics target. Like figure out your ethics target and then decide where AI fits.
It's a great, and they acknowledged that as well. They were like, the people who are developing these AIs don't even really understand their own ethical concerns. They know they're there, and
Right.
they kind of were like, is it just what is this? Giving words to placate you.
Pacify?
No.
Ameliorate.
Ooh, I
That's
like
a great
that
word,
word.
but
Ooh.
no.
Semantic.
Placate.
If only we
Yeah.
had an AI to.
Simplify. No,
Oh,
what is
okay.
it? What is it? Lip service.
Mhm.
Lip service. That's
got
the
it,
term
yeah.
they use in the podcast. So they're like, are the engineers just giving lip service? Maybe, maybe not. I think they truly don't understand the full ethical implications, but because they don't have a framing concept such as the ones that you just named,
Yep.
if we do have a framing concept, that allows much more effective conversation.
Well, and the framing concept for you all really, and Margot, you too, when you're leaving your degree programs to go get jobs, your framing concept is economic,
Yes.
right? So you're not directed to think about like the ethical end of your work as a professional. You're
Good.
you're meant to be framed to think like, can I get a job that's going to let me as a young person buy a house, right? That's how it's all framed. And like, I'm not downplaying the importance of buying houses or whatever, but the fact that you can't afford houses is a residue of this bigger thing that our values have been misconstrued all along, that they've been focused on economics for so long.
We talked about that, Dr. Rudeau brought that up when she talked about gift economy,
Yeah,
for,
yeah,
like indigenous.
for sure.
And
Yeah,
then she was talking about how how can one show their like gift giving back to things. Like if the environment, right, or like the world you live in gives you so much, which it does, how do
sure
you
that.
give back to it? And then like I remember like raising my hand and being like, this question feels mean because I have to respond with a job. Like we are all having these like
Yeah,
de-establishment think conversations in environmental, but I'm still paying my tuition. I'm gonna be debt when I clock out. And
Yep.
I have to go get a job. We
Yeah.
all do. We're
Yeah.
all on handshake.
for sure.
So I was like, this conversation feels like it's a setup. But then she was like, I offer you a solution. And the solution was volunteering or service work. But that's still an economic conversation because it requires sacrifice.
Yes.
Sacrificing my labor hours
Yeah.
for service, which it does work, but it's still within the economic, or I'm still feeling trapped within the economic framework.
Because you have to do both and it's not like you're given service hours in exchange for
It's
your
a great
labor.
way to show care, right? Like it is, and it is important, especially like solidarity, like when people say like solidarity is free. No, it's not. The whole point is that it is sacrifice. But we're all in debt. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know. That's what I got.
No, that's good. That's good. Yeah. And I feel like I feel like a majority of people feel that way. And partly not to make it political, especially here in Florida and Colorado, but the elections last night, I think were indicative of this pushback against this model that we have to just bite the bullet on increasing costs and low welfare and like all of these other things, that there are alternative models out there. This is all happening in this conversation about AI and data centers. And there's still this big push to build all these data centers because the assumption is if we build it, people are going to buy it. Now, again, I want to really emphasize that because right now, if you build it, people are going to use it. But the free use of GPT and whatever else is just so that they can build products to sell you later on.
So that actually raises an important and interesting thing I didn't think about, like a misconception maybe.
Okay.
When we're building these big data centers, or like these mega city data centers, like they're literally the size of a town, are they immediately getting put to use for things that people are already consuming, or are they being put to use by software developers for projects that are in development and not yet
Well,
out?
this is really interesting. This is something I learned from the podcast that Margot, maybe you have a bigger context on than I do, but I really thought it was interesting to hear that he called it geolocating data
Yeah,
processing.
I didn't understand that part, so maybe that's what I'm.
So I think the answer is you build data centers, and if they're all networked sufficiently through the internet, which they all are, then you can, in theory, build algorithms, little AIs to guide big AIs to geolocate data service, so that if you build this big thing in Mississippi, where we're thinking now, or in Colorado, or wherever else, but in Colorado it costs 10 cents a kilowatt hour in the middle of the day, you can do that processing in Florida, where at that same time of day it costs 5 cents a kilowatt hour, and then trade, right?
Mhm.
So you can find the most efficient way to process data as long as you can move data. And that is super interesting.
Is it happening, or it's just like we could?
This is where I was pointing Margot,
We
because
need
I
to.
don't know.
I had never heard of this before. So I thought that was a really interesting point.
Yeah.
Not just, I mean, he said like peak hour or like peak power hours, but then also like moving wherever like there's clean energy at them, like being produced at the moment or something. Like
Yep.
I've never heard of that. So I thought that was interesting, but I can't speak to the to like
It's
if that's
actually,
actually being used and deployed or if that's more research scale.
I feel like it's got to be research scale, because we don't have I can't imagine a world in which we've got this networked sense of power efficiency I think it's really, really regional. Like Mississippi is like, where can we produce power? Our power comes, or Florida. Our power comes predominantly from coal still, and maybe a little nuclear, very little solar. But Florida's power is Florida's power. But it's really intriguing to me to think about a world in which data processing would follow the sun, right? If data centers had solar powered, predominantly even solar powered, data processing would just follow the sun across the country and across the world.
Sun.
It's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I get tempted by it.
Yeah.
But I'm also like, again, not my genre.
Now I'm
That-
wondering about what that would be like in like other parts of the world where like in smaller countries, because I mean in the US we have like all these different time zones, but like what about in smaller countries where they only have
Well,
one time
I think
zone?
this guy, if I was hearing him right in the podcast, was talking about global geodistribution. So he was saying you could, in theory, in the lab right now, build a little artificial specific intelligence that would calculate globally across data centers that were all connected, who had the most efficient processing at the time. And by efficient, I don't mean necessarily money, I mean energy consumption. And that thing could say like, oh, cool, in Norway, right? It's dark most of the time, but when the sun's out, it's really bright. And so we're going to go there for this number of hours, this part of the year, but then we're going to go here. So I don't know. Again, I can't imagine. It seems incredibly complicated to set up in a networking sense, but consumption processing following the sun just seems really beautiful to me.
Well, and then also temperature. They were talking about like
Oh yeah,
cold
yeah.
days, or like if Florida's having a really sunny day and somehow the data center was solar powered, then
Yep.
that was also.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So
Margot, do you know the other question, which is like so like there was a case study about like Northern Virginia having like one of the largest data center things develops in the, wow, that was a hard sentence, developments in the world.
Oh.
I think it was Google, and they were like voting on it. It was like a 27-hour debate for the policymakers to decide, and they voted 4-3. So it happened. And it was like the size of a small town or something like that.
Sounds right.
Is that, would you know, is it being used for things like by consumers, or is it all for Google to play around with these like weird innovations that you're talking about where you're like, but nobody asked you to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know?
Mm-hmm. I don't know what like the consumer turnaround is on like massive data centers. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting issue where they're choosing to put those. And like I know like specifically with OpenAI, they like just invested, I feel like it was with NVIDIA, they just planned out this massive data center where they're just like, we're just gonna put like hundreds of thousands of GPUs together and just like scale it and just like put it somewhere. And I can't remember where that was going or if they decided a place yet, but
Google's
I don't know
Search
the
AI
answer.
is telling us that most of the big new data centers are used for cloud computing. So they're used for a wide range of things, but by specific companies.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is, are these data centers being built predominantly for consumer demand or for expectation of innovation? Is that a way to, is that a way to frame it that makes sense?
Yeah, I think the answer has to be, so if it were the latter, that there was a demand that wasn't being met, that would mean often or sometimes when you tried to use a large language model, it wouldn't work. But it does. So I think they're building it for perceived increased use in the future and innovation, right? So the perception is we need new data centers because everything is turning towards AI. It's going to be implemented in more and more uses. Future demand. Yeah.
Growth like that. We don't know. Well, we never have it before. I don't know if there's ever been an example that maybe I haven't learned of, but
Yeah. So this idea of growth and degrowth is really interesting. There's a whole push towards degrowth. But yeah, in the US at least, I can't think of any models of degrowth. The idea is that we will continue to build GDP and we'll continue to build economic power on the backs of technologies, on the backs of infrastructure, on the backs of natural resources in this pseudo unlimited sense when you think about efficiency gains. Yeah, degrowth model would say, no, there are limits to what percentage of resources we should use. When we hit that cap, we have to let go.
And then you have green growth.
I don't know what that is, but yes, that's a
Think about it recent
phrase. Yeah.
as a comparison to degrowth.
Okay.
My environmental politics professor is like green growth, not degrowth. I think it's mostly because like, how are you going to persuade the American dream to stop growing? Like, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But green growth would say, like, I guess,
Like,
you would have ethical principles that you abide by, and you would try to channel growth to like support.
yeah, I'm suspicious of concepts like green growth because some examples I've heard in that context are like, well, we will just transition from coal power to solar power, and all you're doing is piggybacking different environmental costs, right? So decreasing carbon pollution, let's say, carbon dioxide pollution, but at the expense of rare earth minerals and mining. So it's a trade-off, and do we know if it's a fair trade-off? So,
Well, it's global warming, climate change being such a big thing.
maybe, yeah. So maybe in the short term, yeah.
This tends to be like a characteristic trait of
Right.
humans, so.
And that's why we're like trying to mine asteroids and stuff, because we can get rare earth minerals that aren't on the planet, and that's
And that's always a good idea. We can't wait to see what comes.
science fiction has said that always works out well.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then the other thing about like the green growth concept is, it flew away.
Sorry, I did
Are
that.
they still rare
No.
earth minerals if we get them from asteroids?
No, they're not. Or they're still rare here.
Wonder if the periodic table would have a space for them, like the
Um,
way that. Okay, I'm gonna go sidetrack.
I want to give you an example because I think I told you both this in class, but Margot, I don't know if you've heard this. There's I have data on an Amazon data center that just went into Mississippi. It's a $10 billion facility that Amazon is proposing that it will be water neutral. So let's just assume that it will be water neutral, whatever that means. Well, what that means is they're going to use a bunch of water locally, but then they're going to like make efficiency gains on the shoreline for farmers. So they'll use less water. And so in the end, in the aggregate, water neutral. Let's assume that's the case. But in order to secure that facility, they got local approval in Mississippi to chain together 391 diesel generators in the case of a power outage and store 2.7 million gallons of diesel on site. Just in case. If the power went out in Mississippi, those 391 diesel generators would burn 77,000 gallons of fuel an hour to keep the data center running. And that data center is proposed to be 1 mile from residential neighborhoods.
Sorry.
Yeah.
This is just insane.
And you can't store diesel very long because diesel ages. You have to reuse it and replenish it. So 2.7 million gallons in a storage tank isn't just 2.7 million gallons, but that has to be used and replenished. Now, I don't know how many months or years it can sit, but it can't just sit. So that's 200.7 million gallons the first time, and then it'll get used and replenished.
Is this the banality of evil situation? Like, how are
I
there
don't know.
so many people who are on, because this is a massive project.
It's humongous.
So many
Yeah.
people who are, none of them are thinking like, wait a second, do I want to live in a world like this?
Well, I think the argument was from developers that this is going to bring jobs and property tax growth and all the things we've talked about in class. Yeah, into this rural part of Mississippi, and it's going to be good economically, not environmentally. It's not an argument, right? Environmentally, I mean, economically, it's going to be great for this little part of Mississippi.
Do the people in Mississippi wish they had more AI data center jobs?
No, and in fact, the thing I loved most about this article is that one of the contributors described what was happening as Mississippi's plantation economy.
Oh dear.
Yeah, because what's happened is the same thing that always happens in Mississippi is that some rich landowner is like, I can make a lot of money doing X, but it's on the back of all these laborers and poor residents who can't move, who are there.
Oh gosh, I actually
The plantation
think it's
economy.
scary.
So that's just Mississippi. That's just one facility. That's just one instance of this data center phenomenon. But it's not just environmental costs. It's like social justice costs too, because they're always going on the backs of people who can't avoid them. And that will happen here in Florida. We talked about a case in class, just yet one facility. And Margot, I don't know if you're tracking in Colorado, but I have to assume same things, right? Data centers are going in rural parts of Colorado to support this too.
Yeah, I'm not certain like what's going on locally
Yeah,
specifically for like AI.
yeah.
Goodness.
But it said I find it really fascinating. So it's not only like the carbon costs and the climate change risk and the water use and the energy consumption and the infrastructure development that has to go along with the data center. All of those environmental costs are physical on the face. But then there's all these sort of social justice costs and environmental justice costs, which are all coupled to them. And then there's the I don't know what we call it, moral targeting, right? That we're prioritizing this world of virtual interaction over the world of physical interaction over and over and over again. And with the idea that somehow that's a sustainable model of environmental ethics. And I'm fascinated as an ethicist because what we meant by environmental ethics used to be just the natural environment, like stuff out there. And then it was the natural and the built environment. So that's the stuff like buildings and whatever. And now it's the natural, built, and virtual environment. And all that's happening is the environment is getting like a bigger target.
I'm really interested in the social justice aspect that you brought up. And I would like to explore different ways we can lean into that.
Okay.
But I don't feel that I have the language to ask the questions that, you know, when you feel the query,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not, but the plantation economy sounds like something that would be worthwhile doing a backlog lit review to see what's going on, like how that is discussed in terms of like US economic development.
Sure.
And then how we can apply that to AI. Obviously, there will be differences.
Yeah.
But you know, like the short-sightedness, and then me always talking about complexity theory. There's a systems thinking. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So that would be very interesting. And I personally have a hard time, and this is where I'm like with your ethical conversations or lack thereof in your conferences. I have like a really hard time feeling I could do anything about it because I'm like, if they're completely within a framework that I am trying to like rebel against, then what can I say?
Yeah.
But I guess passion makes you not care, and
But-
then you just do it anyway.
Yeah, but again, I think part of a rent story, I think, but also part of what we just know from science and engineering is that our the folks having impacts aren't doing it from a place like of intentionally moral evil or
Yeah.
badness. It's just from a place of it's not even ignorance. It's that they don't have time or they aren't given opportunities to think about the things that Margot's getting a chance to think about. That's the ethical implications of their work. Right. So part of this idea of like moral motivation is motivating folks just to engage in the questions. Because even if they don't feel like they can do anything about it, the fact that they're thinking about the ethical implications does mean they'll have an impact. It's just small, right? And then if those people end up in high-powered jobs like Margot will and you both will, then see what I did there.
Yeah, maybe one person will be watching.
Well, then you all can have these outsized impacts, which is great.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I again, I find this topic super fascinating and I'm grateful for the conversation. I know you've got to run to class. So Margot, we'll wrap up, but I really would encourage you, if you want to suggest topics to us, you can write to me by email, you can tell me now, whatever you want to do, but I would love to have you stay engaged and your colleagues too. So if you all have stuff you want to talk through, let me know.
Okay, yeah, I'll
Okay.
keep that in mind.
You're great, Margo.
Oh, thank you. I mean, thanks
You
for
had so
having me.
much great insight. I'm so glad you were here.
Yeah, again, I was a little more excited for this topic just personally, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I could keep asking you questions for like all day.
Are there things that you wanted to talk about, Margot, that we didn't cover today? Because there's like a million angles to this.
I don't know, something that I feel like they didn't I didn't have a ton of time to like think about how to phrase this, but just something that I feel like they didn't talk a ton in the podcast about. So like obviously there's a lot with data centers and that's just like straight scaling kind of this existing
Right.
AI um this existing model and paradigm of AI and large language models, and then talk about using AI algorithms to improve energy usage, or like the geolocation thing, or kind of like all these little ways to optimize, to use AI to optimize AI and energy usage.
Yeah.
And I mean, not, those little things, like they still add up. Um, but I know that there's a lot of active research going into like how can we fundamentally restructure AI to be better, and not just how can we take what we have already and just kind of like scale it down or optimize it for energy efficiency, kind of not
Yeah.
how can we improve the existing product, but there is like it's a very active area of research to like come up with completely new um models for AI.
And this is what your field's
Which
supposed to do, right? Isn't this what quantum
Yeah,
computing is
so that's
promising?
why that's kind of why I'm thinking in this area.
Yeah, yeah,
That's something very much like my research group does, is like thinking about there's this concept called like dimensional reduction. So like AI has like, I don't know, whatever, billions of parameters. They're
yeah,
all trying to be optimized, and that's why training's so energy intensive, because it's trying to like optimize a ton of parameters all at the same time that all impact each other and impact results in these complex ways. So if you can like reduce the number of parameters that you're using to represent data, like it, there are ways to optimize training algorithms and kind of come up with these like new base models that don't have billions of parameters. Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so you're focusing on like finding which features are more significant. I don't know that I don't need to like get too technical
Yeah,
into it, but I think it's something they didn't. It didn't seem like the professor addressed a ton of this. Is like kind of like there's the existing AI that's being iterated on and improved on, um, but there's like this active, like a ton of active research, and like if we were to like start computers from scratch, and like
yeah,
I've seen it a little
yeah,
bit from the hardware side, but where they're like trying to reconfigure like physical computers.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but there is a lot going on in like coming up with an entirely new model. And part of that would be like, where does quantum machine learning like
Yeah, yeah,
I feel like that's, I mean, at least in my field, I've seen that thrown around a lot, and I'm very wary of it because
yeah,
like it doesn't really have any meaning yet. But like there are all these ideas about what it could do, but there are a lot of problems with like you can't have big data with quantum machines.
right.
And
And also,
anyway,
also physically, right? They have to run at near absolute zero at this point, right? Don't they require
yeah, kind of
incredible cold to?
the leading ones like trapped ion and
Yeah,
superconducting.
yeah, yeah.
So that's like what IBM does,
Right.
like that. So
Yeah, I find
there's
it.
definitely a lot, yeah, on the engineering side too. But
I
sorry.
love the optimism. I mean, I think there's a future in which we find new ways, maybe it's fusion technologies to produce energy in the first place, and new ways to computate information on the secondary side. Maybe it's quantum, and that combination leads to brand new paradigms in computing. But in the short term, we have to build these infrastructures, which then will be obsolete functionally with the new technology. And so you've already put the environmental cost in, and then you're piggybacking a new environmental cost on top, because all those technologies will necessarily, just because of their physical technologies, require infrastructure of their own. And so it's just chaining costs on top of one another. So you could imagine a science fiction-y world where somebody would be like, we know quantum mechanics is going to happen. We just don't know when quantum computing is going to happen. We just don't know when. So let's pause on infrastructure development now because it will be outmoded, and then we'll go all in when it's time. But of course, we can't do that. Yeah. So
Yeah, no.
I'm excited. I'm excited about your future. I mean, I think if quantum computing continues to advance that could be a brand new paradigm. And supposedly it'll be much more energy efficient if they can
Mhm.
solve the the physical problems. But yeah, no, that's really
Yeah.
exciting.
That was just like another thing that I was thinking about in the podcast that they didn't talk about a ton. And not only on the quantum side, also on the classical side of trying to come up with like new algorithms. But I mean,
Yeah.
The only thing that they said that was remotely close to something like that was when they were talking about like AI models to mitigate environmental impacts of data centers being much smaller algorithms than the, the large language models. And so they were like, can you use AI to mitigate environmental impacts? Is it, silly fighting fire with fire by using AI to help prevent AI from doing damage? But they were like, they're smaller, it's not so bad.
Yeah.
But that's still not what you were talking about at all.
I think that would be another interesting topic, but some of the key theorists, including Luciano Floridi, who are reading my grad class, are pretty well convinced that the future is AI leading AI. That human processing already can't keep up with the sort of processing going on, the complexity of processing going on with large language models. So to guide it, if it's ever let loose, you'll require little AIs to guide the big AIs and littler ones to guide those, and then you'll end up in a world of AI guiding AI.
We didn't even talk about AGI.
Yeah, we're gonna leave that aside for now as a
yeah.
science fiction thing for now. But
We talked about it in the podcast.
yeah, I know.
They did, and they connected it to like the regionalism and
Yeah.
they
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. This is great, y'all. Thank you both for being here.